granular data, but it's been found in many states. So not only has the number of people in prison gone up, but the harshness of those conditions, or the number of people that are sort of spending time in solitary confinement, has gone up as well. And we also find that there's racial disparities in those numbers of individuals that spend time in solitary confinement. In terms of
And just
post-release,
to interject, and this is largely sort of extrajudicial. This is decisions that are being made by correctional
yeah,
facilities, correct?
and these are individuals that there's administrative reasons that people are put in solitary confinement, um, and there are disciplinary reasons that people are put in solitary confinement. And there is a system of due process within the prison system that's sort of, um, I mean, maybe using due process is not even the right term to use, but there's a process where theoretically you have if you have a disciplinary infraction, you're alleged, there's an opportunity to have a hearing. But it's all run within the prison and by the prison administrators. So you can imagine how effective that actually might be. But there's no lawyers or anything like that. So these and like I said, it's kind of a black box. These prisons. It's hard to. We don't really know. They're physically out at away from the cities, away from where most of the population lives. But there's serious harm happening in these facilities. So that is an area that hopefully can get more attention, and hopefully with the availability of more data and people that are interested in criminal justice issues, there'll be more light shed on those issues and how we can improve the system and just what's going on. In terms of community supervision, this is something that happens out in the open, but I think it's something that hasn't gotten a ton of attention. But this is there are about 4.5 million people on some form of community supervision in the U.S., and so that's about 2/3 of the entire population under criminal justice supervision in the United States. So it's a huge part of the system. Many of those people end up in jail or prison because of a conditions violation. So for those of you not familiar with what probation might look like, it's a big part of it is you have these set of conditions, and it's usually a very long laundry list of conditions where it's meeting with the probation officer at some regular interval. There might be drug tests. There's usually a requirement to stay employed or show that you've been looking for jobs. There's conditions that are involved with if you have a treatment program, you have to go to that and provide proof. And this is all happening at the courthouse generally. So you're coming for the meeting, you're coming for the drug test, you're coming to the courthouse to provide the employment verification, and at the same time, you might have a family and you might have a job that you have to maintain, and the courthouse is only open Monday through Friday from whatever regular business hours. So it would be challenging for anyone, but these is kind of what probation looks like, and if you violate those rules, you can face incarceration, and in fact, a lot of people do end up incarcerated. So,
and you said that's 4.5 million.
There's about 4.5 million individuals that are on either probation, post-release supervision, or parole, and most of those are individuals on probation.
And we have over 2 million incarcerated.
Over 2 million incarcerated.
Right. And so together, I think I read if you put the number of people who are on supervision and the number of people who are incarcerated, if it were the population of a city, it would be like the second largest city in the United States. So it's the breadth and the impact is actually staggering. I want to make sure that we have time for some of the questions that are coming in. But before we do that, I feel like each of you has just such a wealth of information, so much to bring to the table. And this, for some of our viewers, they might have, some experience with what you've discussed, but some people might be new to the topic. And for people who want to do a little more research, or take more of a deep dive, and I wanted to know, are there any resources that you could recommend in your specific subject areas, or just criminal justice in general? Book, a film, a podcast that people could turn to get some more information. I'm actually in the middle of Danielle Sered's book. Alicia, I was thinking about it when you were talking about restorative justice. She talks about violence and alternatives to incarceration. It's called Until We Reckon, and her name is Danielle Sered, and it's something I didn't know very much about. And I acknowledge that it's definitely a privilege to be able to learn about the criminal justice system from materials and resources and not lived experience. But for people who might want to do a little more, if anybody has anything to recommend, just jump in.
I would say a documentary that's on Netflix that is pretty powerful is it's like a mini series, 6 episodes. It's Time, the Khalif Browder story, about a youth who was a young boy who was accused of stealing a backpack and basically held on bail for 3 years while awaiting trial. 2 of those years spent in solitary confinement, and it's just one of the most I think impactful documentaries that I have seen that show the harm of the current system.
One thing I was going to say, sorry to preempt, one resource that I thought was really helpful was actually season 3 of the Serial podcast, where they focus, instead of focusing on an individual case or an individual kind of moment in time, they take a really deep look at the criminal justice system in a large city. I forget which city it was. It might be Cleveland or somewhere in Ohio. I can't recall specifically, but I thought that was one of the best kind of long form journalistic pieces on the criminal justice system, and to the point where I think there's oftentimes a lot of cynicism, in the criminal justice community, which is why a lot of people, who work as DAs or defense attorneys, for example, we don't watch Law and Order anymore because it's like, well, that's our lives, that's our job. Like we're trying to escape that. We don't tune into that. I know a lot of those people felt the same way about season 3 of Serial, which I actually think speaks really highly about it, right? Because if by the end of that season, everything, or you've been exposed to everything that seasoned practitioners in that area know of, then I think that speaks loudly about how good of a vision it gives you kind of from the inside. I think that's a really good resource for people to take advantage of.
And so one of the things that I failed to mention when I was just talking about my background is that the public interest fellowship that I was on, where I was doing the collateral housing consequences, is called the Lyman Fellowship. So that's a fellowship through Yale Law School, and it's not only a fellowship, but it's a great public interest program. And it fits in here also because they've just done a lot of work on producing criminal justice related research and material. So they've done an amazing report on solitary confinement, actually, and that's all available at their website. So it's LIMAN, and it's within the Yale Law School website. And they also work on issues about fines and fees in the criminal justice system. So they're just a great resource for reports on these issues that touch, all of the major points that you would want to know about. So I would advocate to visit their website. More in general, though, I want to suggest things that maybe all of you have read or seen, or most of you at least heard of. But I think that just revisiting the new Jim Crow, if you've already read it, or if you haven't, read it. Just actually read it. And 13th, the documentary on Netflix. So if either of those two, I think that there's kind of a canon now building around these issues. And those are two that a lot of people will have read or seen. And that's a great place to have a conversation starting from that point. And obviously, when you're more interested, you get into the more detailed stuff, but I think that I still need to revisit both of those. And I think it's great to do, especially in this moment where a lot of people are kind of listening and talking about these issues, and also as something to remember, just as something you can recommend to your friends or people that you talk to that maybe haven't really read or looked for or watched documentaries about any of these issues. That those are two great places to start, because it's among the type of materials in this area. I think there are two things that a lot of people have read and watched.
And I'll keep it focused. I think that one of the really interesting things about oversight in this country is the product that it creates, and all of that is publicly available. So if you're interested in the results of both local and federal oversight engagement, the problems that are found and the solutions that are put forward, I would recommend visiting the US DOJ Civil Rights Division website. There they have every single what's called a findings letter ever created by the Special Litigation Section. I think there's going to be an email that goes around, so I can find a selection that I think are worth your time. They tend to be short and they tend to be very focused. And what I like to do is to compare it to the press that ends up covering it. And you realize sort of how much you lose out on the translation that takes place from the work that dedicated staff have engaged in, and what ultimately lands on the public consciousness. And you can sort of see the tools that are brought to the table by different oversight agencies and their ultimate results. I would also recommend, recently there was a series of reports in LA County that came out around the probation department and its use of force as related to youth in facilities. And to Ryan and other panelists' point, the fact that these institutions are black boxes creates a lot of the issues that we're struggling with today. So if you're interested in peeking within that black box, oversight product is a great way of doing that.
That's great. Thank you. So we have a few questions. I'm just going to fly through them. So the first question is, how can agencies without resources meet these reform mandates? What do you do if you're a chronically underfunded small agency?
I think a lot of it, actually, you'd be surprised at how much could be done without kind of needing further money. I mean, when the problem is structural, when the problem, as Alicia said, is with the system itself, oftentimes it just requires kind of a shifting of where those resources are going, as opposed to demanding new resources. And right now, we're moving toward an age, hopefully, where there's a greater de-emphasis on using the hammer of the criminal justice system, right? You don't necessarily need more prosecutors or, in turn, more defense attorneys if you're just simply not arresting people for offenses that probably shouldn't be entering the system in the first place. So that can be done really through policy that doesn't even require legislation necessary, right? If you're looking at the rise of progressive DAs, whatever that means, but the rise of progressivism within the prosecutorial world itself, you could just have a DA say, I'm no longer going to prosecute petty shoplifting, right? I'm no longer going to prosecute jaywalking or some other absurdly minimalistic offense. And that itself will will free up resources that can then be dedicated to kind of more productive means. So really, when you're talking about structures, you just need to kind of shift them around, and you don't really need as much money as some may think.
We have a question that I think is sort of tailored for Alicia here. How do we bring criminal justice reform leaders together with immigrants' rights leaders to provide some, insight into reforming the institution of the immigration system?
I mean, that's a really good question, and something that definitely needs to happen. I think viewing the criminal justice system as a holistic, in a holistic manner, that's something that the Bronx Defenders has always championed, and that's why we have different practices. So, bringing the leaders together. I mean, honestly, I wish I had the answer and that I could do it. I think I've seen a lot of in just the marches that I've gone to in New York. I've seen a lot of organizations already, either like family, the movement for family power, and like immigration based organizations, like participating and engaged. But I truly can't because I'm so in the direct representation mode, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer how to build coalitions in this way. Maybe Sergio's raising his hand, he can answer.
Oh, thank you for that. I think what's really interesting is that you can force the creation of the kinds of spaces that we're discussing here right now. So if you take a look at some of the federal consent decrees that were put into place during the Obama years, you see the requirement to hold regular meetings with particular kinds of community groups, and you require the attendance of certain kinds of law enforcement personnel, including the chief executive, whether you're talking about a police chief, a sheriff, or the head of a state police. So that is one place where a legal tool can be used to create an actual space for folks to come together. A lot of the problems here is that pressure doesn't exist and needs to be brought forth through various avenues. So that's just one minor idea.
We have time for like one last question that I think all of you can quickly answer, so I want to squeeze it in here, which is somebody has asked, I'll paraphrase, which is, do you think you could be doing what you're doing without your JD?
No, it's for my job, it's a requirement, and for my previous employment, I was a lawyer, so that was a requirement there as well.
I agree. For my particular career path, obviously you need a JD to serve as a lawyer and as a prosecutor. Strangely enough, not in all places, but at least in New York City, you did. One thing I will say though is that you certainly don't need a JD to work meaningfully in this space. This community is filled with people who are social workers, who have been in law enforcement previously in some other capacity, who've been in advocacy in some other capacity. You certainly don't need to be a lawyer to do this. So if you're having hesitation about going to law school, follow that instinct and then really kind of find your own path forward. Believe me, there isn't just one road to take.
Great.
I would agree with that. I mean, I of course need my JD for my current job, but a lot of the support that clients get in my office comes from people who don't have JDs, like social workers, like advocates. So there's many ways to affect change without needing to be a lawyer.
And the last thing I'll add is sometimes your JD can be a liability, which is it puts a real wall between yourself and some of the groups that you're working with, which might already exist there because of education and class. And it has a real cognitive impact on the way that you look at problems and potential solutions. So often I find myself trying to lose a lot of the training and frames that I picked up in law school, or that I picked up in my trial positions, to get myself to look at a problem in a novel fashion. And I think that certainly points to, Jorge's point, Alicia's point, which is at the end of the day, you have to be cognizant of all the different tools that are in front of you, so that you can really pick the appropriate ones. And often in this space, that isn't the legal one.
Well, I, for one, am grateful that you all got your JDs and that you chose Yale and that we can claim you as our star alumni. And I'm so grateful that you're doing what you're doing, the important work and all the spaces that you're working in. And just an enormous thank you and gratitude for you taking the time to be here to share your wisdom in this way today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This was so interesting. I think we definitely could have spent a lot more than an hour talking about this. So stay in touch, and thank you all for tuning in today on a Friday afternoon. Hope that this was the best way possible to close out your week. And now you have stimulated all sorts of things in your mind to talk about this evening and going forth into your weekend. In the meantime, definitely get involved with us. This, again, was co-sponsored by a couple of different groups, First Gen Yale and the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, but it has been put together by the Yale Latino Alumni Network. And I just want to let you know how you can get involved with this awesome group. The Yale Latino Alumni Network has an email address, which is right here. You're going to receive this in an email that will come to you tomorrow. the Yale Latino Alumni Network at aya.yale.edu. There's also a Facebook page. Again, you will receive this in an email tomorrow. No need to scribble this down. If you want to take a quick pic with your phone, go for it. You can also do a search on Facebook for Yale Latino Alumni Network and get involved. This is a growing group. It's an awesome group, and we do regular webinars with fantastic alumni all over the world. So stay tuned for the next one. Thank you all so much, and enjoy your weekend.